I'm a textile designer. We don't do social design, or do we? I don't really know, but I'm really interested in finding out, and I'm kind of making it my mission at the moment to really understand a lot more about design and what it can do. I mean, as textile designers, our history is pretty rubbish. You know, we are the piece workers. We're the women on the factory floors that operate the looms. We are, you know, invisible as textile designers behind fashion designers. Having taught students at UAL for over 20 years, the textile design students are all girls, practically. A few boys nowadays, but really all girls. And young women who like to put their head down and look at something deeply and use their fingers and make something beautiful that appeals to some part of them inside. And actually, as a result of that, they're not great speakers, and they don't articulate. They don't stand up and give great big talks about their work and how it fits in. And actually, that's not what they're thinking or feeling as they're making. And yet you're all wearing clothes in a room with carpet and curtains everywhere. And we know that the textile industry is hugely polluting. It's massively significant in our global economy, but it's massively significant in terms of the impacts we're making environmentally. And there's been a lot of argument recently about the statistics around impacts. I've got a few slides and all that kind of thing, but you know where I'm coming from. I want to understand really what we are as textile designers, what we can be to contribute to change. And that isn't just reducing the impact of the textiles that we're making. That's about who's making them, about who's made and extracted those raw materials, who owns those raw materials, and actually much more recently, if we're working towards circular fashion and textiles, who are we making this stuff for? Who's owning it? And who's going to continue to own it and dominate our materials world? Are we creating fashion and textiles for the future that we'll have no access to? We'll have to actually be acquiring from industry that owns all of these resources, and at the same time continue to sort of damage our environment, our water supplies, etc. So I'm going to give you a little 5-minute excerpt from something I did on Saturday, which was sort of stand up at an Extinction Rebellion rally in Hammersmith, because I have taught myself to speak as a textile designer, you know, to speak out about the ideas that are in that making, that are in those products, that are in that thought process, that go into the textiles and how that connects to the rest of the world. So I did it by appealing to the shoppers. It was a rally that was about opposing London Fashion Week and the catwalk shows. And it was outside the Lyric Hammersmith, and it was addressing all the shoppers. And there they were, popping in and out of Primark and H&M and all the other shops. And I proposed a new future. And so I'd like to do a little bit of that in just a second. The UK is actually the worst European country for consuming fashion and textiles. We have the sort of legacy of being fashion leaders. And as a result of that, we are big fashion consumers. And so the work that we've done in textiles began as Textiles Environment Design, TED, and looked to reduce the impact of the textiles we were making through the product, whether that was by fibre choice, by the choice of the dye stuff. And later that sort of emerged into looking at how we can control or predict how something might be used, and then reused and regenerated and redistributed. So we've arrived at a situation with the fashion and textiles industry where sustainability has been hotly debated for a long time, and we're now been presented with the idea that the circular economy will solve lots of our problems, that circular design will solve lots of our problems, because we can take those textiles back, we can regenerate them, we can make new fibres, new products, and put them back out there into the high street. But is that actually going to help things? Is that actually going to change things? Does that democratize our fashion? Does that lower the impacts, or does that actually increase the impacts in terms of chemicals and energy, etc.? So our sort of journey has been from being practiced textile designers into learning to look and speak and think about the work we're making through a sustainability, actually sort of through a green lens is what we called it first of all, into eco, then into sustainable design, and now into something we're calling circular design. But it's not design for the circular economy. It's not designing just things and ideas that help companies recycle their products and then put them back on the shop floor. Circular design is broader and more holistic than that. It's actually about looking at all of the interactions around a life cycle of these textiles, of these materials, of these things that actually facilitate us to live in the modern world. Through making, we were able to understand that what we were doing was understanding material systems. So not only just taking a fabric, but seeing the fabric as part of some kind of system, whether that's a biological system, cradle to cradle, or a synthetic technical system. We were borrowing materials, doing something to them, had to think carefully about that, and then putting them back into a system. So we were no longer taking things in a linear way and putting them somewhere else. We had to think of design as ourselves, as designers, of being part of these material systems. But in order to flow textiles and fashion and goods around society, we actually have to look at what the models are, what the ethical production models are, as well as the kind of business models that are operating and moving these textiles around, and actually how design has agency to change some of those models, to influence, to inspire. And as we then began to produce circular fashion textiles and put them out into the world, we realized that as designers, we also had a job to do with the user. That, you know, if you look in your own wardrobe, the statistics are that 70% of it is not worn very often, most of it, a lot of it, not at all anymore. But we're not flowing that stuff back into our resource flow to all utilize. We won't get rid of the stuff because we paid good money for it, and therefore it's going to stay in our wardrobe. That's only one little sort of behavior that is a barrier to us having a different kind of sustainable fashion, a different kind of fashion industry in the future. As circular designers, we set ourselves the challenge to also look at how design can support and facilitate behavior change. And so this then became quite sort of key for us to sort of understand that we did have to do so much more than materialize an idea of change that we wanted to see. We had to connect, we had to collaborate, we had to bridge worlds. And as such, then our portfolio of practice as textile designers, as circular textile designers, started to include facilitation as well as articulation, as well as supporting new collaborations. So really sort of looking at how a 60-year-old scientist works with a 25-year-old head of product in a fashion company, and getting those two, being the bridge between those two, communicating well so that change can happen, both of them. So we've begun to map the new roles that circular design is presenting, and they're all in some way, I think, socially connected. And I think this is why maybe Lucy sort of invited me to speak, and to also why we are keen and we're part of the Social Design Institute. The roles that we can see emerging through our work all mean that we have to be engaged with others. We have to look at design as a different practice. When we first start now, you have to start with the end of life. You don't sit down and make a textile. You say, where is this going to end up? And then you work backwards from it. So the way we teach textiles has really got to change. And we've got to look at and we're really interested in looking at the courses, looking at the way that textile design is taught, and actually flip things around. We're not designing for recycling anymore. We're designing for end of life at the outset. That's a whole new approach to a curriculum. We're designing things that are going to get shared. They're going to get used by more than one person. So how does that change what we're designing? We're designing for extended life. Time and time and time again will these products get used, but what happens to the material? How does that need to evolve and change through these different user groups? Designing for rental, the sharing economy. If you can see what's happened to, traveling in cities through Airbnb and zip cars, then we've already seen the projected forecast for what will happen when we start to rent and borrow and loan our clothes. This is already one of the biggest growing areas in the States, is this rental and resale market. But also designing materials that transition, that actually change as the user changes. I've forgotten what the last one is. Terribly sorry. But you can see what I'm doing. We're taking the challenges ahead, and we're sort of saying design is not how we used to think of it. It's not what it was, and it's not enough anymore to have your head down looking at the cloth, deciding how beautiful it's going to be and what colour and what kind of flower needs to be printed on that textile. It's about how it's connecting into the future world, into the world we want to be part of making. So on Saturday, I asked the passing shoppers to think about what the future of King Street might be if they came on a Saturday with loads of bags and then left with one. So kind of reversing what's currently happening. And I took shop by shop and explained how that might look and how that might work. So there's a TK Maxx. TK Maxx sells damaged, unsold, overproduced stock. TK Maxx will still be there, but it'll be tiny because, and this is already in the pipeline, technology developed to optimize production so that companies aren't making a loss or producing products that are overproduced and then resold through TK Maxx. You can go into TK Maxx, you can selectively find unsold or damaged stock, but you could also buy repaired stock. So what you might not know is up to 20% of all fabric produced globally doesn't ever get used. It's damaged, it actually ends up as fallout on the factory floor. They call it fallout fashion. And anything from a sort of snagging with the foot of a sewing machine causing a hole through to, oil stains from another machine. It's fallout fashion, can actually be remade, remodeled, and perhaps that's what TK Maxx is selling. But that means a whole different kind of design practice around the remaking and repairing and restoring of the goods that flow there. Marks and Spencer's, their plan A, just more transparency needed there. They're planning to not have any cotton in clothing. I think within the next 5 years now, and only in bed sheets. So they're making these kind of strides forward, but nobody shopping in Marks and Spencer's knows, as they pick up a garment, what it is that they're doing and what's going on. And actually, you don't know where things are made either, and you don't know what that looks like. So the idea of the future might be that we're able to access this completely transparent picture around our clothes, that top technology will enable a transparency around the supply chains, and we can make much more informed decisions about this recycled fibre content and where that's been reprocessed. I talked about how the library could be the place for remaking. This is all about giving the shopper pleasure. It's about fashion and styling yourself and dressing yourself and changing the colour that you're wearing that month. Still being possible, still being a form of joyful expression, but finding ways to do that without a direct purchase of a virgin resource that then gets stored into your cupboard. It's about this flow, designing for these flows up and down this high street. I talked quite a lot about schools and how I feel that very strongly that school uniform, we're getting it so wrong. We could get it so right in this country. It could be a completely circular product, and kids could be developing their approach to clothing themselves the rest of their lives through the school uniform experience. I I think I'm going to stop there, actually. I know we're over time, but you get the picture.